Now, scores of NSFAS beneficiaries are at risk of being thrown out of their accommodation due to unpaid bills. To avoid this, NSFAS says it has engaged landlords and also assured them that all the outstanding payments will be made by mid-June. For more on this, I am joined by Asive Dlanjwa, who's the spokesperson for the South African Union of Students. Asive, good to have you on the program despite the circumstances. So what proactive measures is NSFAS implementing to really ensure timely and transparent disbursement of these accommodation allowances to students who really are in need?
Good afternoon, and also to your viewers and your listeners. The reality is that it would become apparent that NSFAS is struggling quite severely so to administer the new accommodation model. Especially as it pertains to paying service providers in terms of student accommodation providers. Because since the beginning of the year, it has been this back and forth. We had accepted the explanation that had been given by the administrator a few weeks back pertaining to what was a plan effectively, or rather essentially to deal with these backlogs. But it would appear that they were not able to implement that plan and that process to the extent to which it would ensure that all students their accommodation has been paid. The undertaking that he had given to the nation at large a few weeks back was that they had a team in place and that all of those backlogs would be dealt with within that particular time. And now what we're seeing is obviously not that. So I suppose the sum and total is that NSFAS is seemingly struggling to administer this, and as a result, it has left thousands of students either some being evicted or some of them being threatened with eviction, and especially at this time because they are currently engaged in their mid-year examinations as we speak. So it has really been a devastating time.
I think it's important for us to highlight just what you've pointed out right now. What challenges do students and landlords face due to these delayed payments? And how do these delays then impact students' well-being, but also their academic success as well?
It would obviously have devastating impact. Why? Because in its nature, accommodation is one of the cornerstones of of security. So when students are engaged in the academic project, as they are currently engaged in examinations now, to have a landlord that is breathing down your neck and threatening you with eviction, that if I don't get my money this time, I'm going to evict you, you can obviously imagine the hostile environment that would create for the students and the impact that it would have on their ability to be able to effectively perform in their academics. So that has been a crisis in itself. With landlords also, there is a level of sympathy that we have towards them because obviously they've got overheads and month-to-month expenses that they must pay for, and NSFAS is aware of this. So for you not to be able to receive the money that is due to you to be able to maintain and upkeep your student accommodation is obviously also a crisis for them, as I would imagine. So that is where we are. And I think what is most irritating about this is that it's either NSFAS is being dishonest or there is just or the incompetency is now extending even to the administrator himself, because this is not the undertaking, as I've said before, that was given to the nation in terms of having to deal with this thing. We had hoped that by the time that we get into the mid-year examinations, that these things would have been dealt with. It's not difficult. The money is there, number one. Number two, you know who your students are. So it can be difficult. And the landlords have submitted, all landlords, I can tell you for a fact, for the majority of them, or at the very least, have submitted their claims. So really, you begin to wonder where is the crisis at, because it's not that you don't know who your beneficiaries are, nor is it a matter of that you do not have the money.
So as mentioned in my intro, there has been an update from NSFAS, which is also appealing for patience. So what do you make of the recent and upcoming bulk payments that they've mentioned, and also the steps that are being taken to streamline the payment process, but also minimize future delays in dispersing these allowances? Are you convinced?
Look, it is, I think I had a conversation with one of your colleagues when, as I said, about a month or so ago, when the administrator was taking us into confidence in terms of the plans that they have in place to deal with some of these issues. And I had said it to them that we would be convinced to the extent to which NSFAS would prove to be able to implement these measures. We will not yet sound the trumpets of victory who are still in the woods. It is regrettable that a few months or a month so later that we find ourselves in a point where NSFAS has effectively failed to follow through with the commitments which they have made. Now, what is my response is that even with these commitments, we will only be able to take them seriously to the extent to which the NSFAS is able to effectively implement them.
So also interesting is this requirement for TVET college students to open bank accounts for allowances. This may pose access barriers, some might argue. How is NSFAS then supporting students in really navigating this process, but also ensuring equitable access to financial aid?
No, you see, that one is a big victory for the students because a majority of students already have bank accounts. Yeah. And the alternative to this was that useless and corrupt direct payment system, which saw students being charged, some of them up to 200 rand bank charges or administrative fees. So this would be much easier. The students would be getting all their entire allowance that is due to them without any penalties. They will get it conveniently in the bank accounts that they've been using. So we support that. That is ideally what we want, a direct payment system where there is not a lot of middlemen and players. So that in itself would be obviously a welcomed intervention, and we think it will prove, as it has already to some students, and they've also largely welcomed it, the students that have been receiving money in their personal bank accounts, as opposed to having to pay fees, open separate accounts with these corrupt service providers, etc. So this should prove to be much more effective for the students to be able to effectively and efficiently receive their allowances.
So Asive, from what you've observed, how does NSFAS then plan to address some of these concerns that have been raised from landlords and students about these administrative challenges and communication gaps which are contributing to this payment delay?
Sorry, can you please repeat that? My apologies.
I'm saying from what you have observed, what do you make of the situation, especially when it comes to the grievances being raised by landlords or service providers?
Look, as I said in the beginning, I think the situation is rather a devastating one because of obviously the material impact it has, particularly on the students and the landlords, number one. Number two, there is a clear evidence of incompetence and really just confusion, utter confusion at the level of NSFAS based on some of the factors that I have given you, that all of these challenges are not happening at the fact that there is no money or NSFAS does not know who their beneficiaries are. So I suppose what we make of the situation is that it is a devastating one, and really there does not seem to be the required competence at the level of NSFAS to be able to deal with some of these issues.
Also interesting are these concerns that have emerged about misinformation on social media. From what you make, how does NSFAS then plan to communicate effectively with the stakeholders, including yourselves, but also maintaining trust and transparency in this process?
That is an ongoing work, and you are correct. It poses also a lot of risk, and more than anything, what needs to be done is that NSFAS needs to. You see, when they wait for crisis to happen and then they react, that's when you create a room for opportunists to spread and perpetuate misinformation. If NSFAS would be able to communicate effectively and proactively with all its stakeholders, we would be able to deal with some of those information gaps, because you don't want students to already be desperate when they are looking for information and find them listening to bogus clowns on TikTok about what they think is happening at the scheme. So this is why they must be able to, for instance, right now, the NSFAS had not come back to us before this crisis ensued to say that based on a commitment we had made a month or so ago, we have faced these challenges, A, B, C, and D, and as a result, we do not think we'll be able to meet some of the commitments which we had given. So that proactive and consistent communication and constant communication with all its stakeholders, including students, including colleges, including universities, including student leadership, all of those things will close the gap for misinformation, etc. So there just needs to be constant, honest communication.
As we continue with the discussion around solutions, what long-term strategies do you believe NSFAS should consider to really enhance the efficiency and effectiveness of its own operations, particularly in administering this financial aid and accommodation allowance?
Look, it's not difficult. We have been saying for the longest time that NSFAS is riddled with incompetence. It's almost endemic, really, to be honest with you. You need to get rid of those people. They are highly, highly incompetent. We even said, even at the appointment of the administrator, that we doubted that the administrator is going to be successful in executing his duties, because the people that are meant to execute the work are still the same cohort and bunch of incompetent people. So you have to deal with issues of incompetence at the scheme. There's no way around that. So that's the first thing that will assist us to be able to deal with this. And then in terms of strategies, we have proposed quite a few. One of them was the direct payment system, obviously without these corrupt partners where students receive their monies directly, because the more you remove middlemen, the better and the more efficient and effective the system is going to be. So it's some of those things, and obviously as we speak right now, there are not any governance structures at the scheme, obviously, because the board has been dissolved. So as soon as possible, that needs to be dealt with. Also, you've got about 3 senior post executive from a CFO, a CEO, and a chief information officer who also are not there. So we need to be able to fill those posts. And to the extent which we're able to do that, we will be able to build some level of competency and build a capacity and efficiency within the scheme.
Asive, as we wrap up our conversation, how can collaboration between NSFAS, stakeholders and the community itself ensure the accessibility but also the sustainability of financial aid for South African students? But as we continue with the conversation, also fostering this equitable opportunity for education and socio-economic empowerment?
Look, right now, for where we are as a country, in terms of the sustainability of the scheme, one of the biggest threats right now would be the composition of the 7th administration, because there are parties within who might probably see themselves leading some of these departments and the government that are opposed to this equitable distribution and access to opportunities of learning, who want to limit this, either turning them into loans, etc. So I think the greatest strength to that sustainability actually lies within what would be the composition of the 7th administration. But in terms of NSFAS in itself, it has expanded its work. I mean, the work speaks for itself. It is currently funding almost 1 million students, has funded over 5 million students. The budget, is now almost 50 billion, and it's been growing. It's doing well in terms of its reach. It's just administrative issues to ensure that it is effective in doing that. Those are the things we need to deal with. But the biggest threat right now would be the composition, at least to its sustainability, would be the composition of the 7th administration.
Asive, thank you so much for your time. As our conversation with Asive Dlanjwa, he's a spokesperson for SAUS, comes to a close.